Ready? All right, cool. Good morning, everyone. It is 11:05, so we want to get our meeting started today for our special meeting for our Cannabis Standing Committee, and we'll call the meeting to order and just let the record reflect that both Supervisor Phillips and I are present. And we have two items, one item on the agenda today, but at the end we want to let everybody know there will be a chance for public comment as well. So to start us off, to receive a presentation, we have David McPherson of HDL Companies on the fiscal analysis on the commercial cannabis industry, and also today's hearing is about providing additional direction to staff. But to get us started is our Assistant CEO, Nick Chulos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few brief opening comments. As you know from the cover memo that was put out with the HDL report, the cover memo that our office put together, the cannabis world is rapidly evolving. It has evolved a lot in the last couple of years. It continues to evolve very rapidly. The regulatory structure continues to evolve. There were initial projections made back in the 2015-16 timeframe projecting that there would be a significant amount of revenue generated through the cannabis industry. And tax rates were set at that time. What has come to light, as you well know, is the competition has increased significantly. Issues of supply, oversupply potentially have come up. The state tax level was established after the county Measure Y was approved. So a lot of things have changed. We agree with the committee that this is a time to reevaluate the tax structure. HDL has done a lot of work on this, and you'll hear more from Mr. McPherson in a minute. We've also seen some work that Fitch has done, another firm, and basically Fitch agrees with HDL that there is a need to re-examine the tax rate for a lot of reasons. The question really before the committee and ultimately the board is, what is the proper tax level? What's the proper tax level that will support the industry, that will provide the funds necessary to implement the cannabis regulatory program that the county has put together, and to do other things like public health outreach, and to uphold the essential concept that the voters approved under Measure Y, which was that there would be revenue to run the program and potentially revenue for other governmental services that would come from that. So obviously for those reasons, any tax adjustment needs to be carefully considered. Just a few observations that we wanted to inform the committee and the public about. The cannabis tax per the county ordinance is a fiscal year tax. So if there's going to be an adjustment to the tax rate, it would need to be timed at the fiscal year, which would be July 1st. There's a question I think the committee may want to consider, and it's in the HDL report, but how do we want to view our tax rate in the unincorporated area in light of what the rate is with other cities in Monterey County? How much coordination do we want to do at that point? Another thing is that today at the close of business is the deadline for the industry to update the RMA and the Treasurer Tax Collector on essentially how they want to have their tax reporting handled, whether they want to be what is taxed at the maximum level that their temporary permit allows, or is there some other level that they want to be taxed at? And it's a self-certification under penalty of perjury. So there'll be a lot more information coming together by the close of business today that'll be analyzed over the next week or two by the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. So that would give us a much clearer picture, I think, of the potential revenue impacts of any change in the tax rate, at least in the short term. So, Mr. Chairman, with those opening remarks, with your approval, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. McPherson to present the HDL report. Thank you.
Before you do that, Nick,
Yes.
Mr. Chulos, I just want to emphasize two main points, which is one, you mentioned that it was under Measure Y that says that any changes to the taxation levels needed to be done at the next fiscal year. So that would be July 1st, but that is per Measure Y?
Technically per the county ordinance. Yes,
county
that implemented Measure Y.
Okay.
Right.
Very well. And then, like you said, today is the last day for the deadline for our local businesses in cannabis to self-certify.
Correct.
And so that's going to provide us additional information after today to analyze that we probably should look at our next Cannabis Standing Committee on April 20th.
That would be the opportune time to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chulos. Okay. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to be here with you guys today. Again, my name is David McPherson from HDL. 2 years ago, when we were in the same room trying to make the final determination when we went to the ballot about where we were, the county was one of about approximately 25 age cities and counties that were actually had a ballot measure that are allowing cannabis business to exist in their communities. And as such, we didn't have as much information at that time as far as data analytics and where we were going, because that was pre-Prop 64 world. Since then, there is approximately 100 to 112 cities and counties in California that have moved forward and have started beginning to do something in permitting in California. So when staff reached out to us to kind of circle back and evaluating where we are today, we've seen some significant changes, as we've indicated in the report. And first, when we started off in looking at this, is trying to look at where we were on assumptions for the county 2 years ago. And staff had provided based on meetings and stakeholder meetings and input from industry as far as what was the number of activities and the type of activities. You can see that we started with 150 on an assumption to as high as 300, and actually where we are today on each of the type of categories, pretty consistent to our low assumptions. Nurseries taken up, so if you take the cultivation nurseries, you get closer to that 150, but obviously a uniquely adjustment to where those numbers occurred. With that said, as we moved forward and evaluating really as the CDF, which is the Department of Food and Ag, did their reports for their CEQA impact reports of what there was out there, they had estimated that the public consumption was about 2.5 million pounds, and in such that what percentage that will continue to be provided by the black market until we move into a better regulated world and better enforcement over there, but we still don't think the black market's going to go away completely. As such, you can see where the legal market available for cultivation is 1.7 million pounds, of which today or in the last couple of weeks, as we ran the final reports, Cal Cannabis, which is a subsidiary of the CDFA, has 2,848 permits for cultivation statewide, and thus their production capacity based on that square footage is 5.3 million pounds. So you can see right off the bat we're almost 3 times the amount of production potentially, and what the cause and effect of that will be. And available greenhouse space in Monterey, based on information provided to us, Monterey has 2 million square feet of available, which means that the production capacity for them is producing 0.4 million pounds, and that's reflective of the 1.75 million legal market, which means that the percentage of legal market comparison is 23% of that production. So as we looked at the rates settling across the state, we have a couple things that are occurring. One is, as we mentioned to you, we had looked at, in 2 years ago, the price per pound for indoor grow was $2,000 a pound, and for mixed light was ranging around $1,500. In today's market, an indoor cultivation is generating around $1,500 a pound, and outdoor grow, or mixed light grows, is getting between 700 to 800 pounds on an average. So you can see we're moving as the saturation or volume comes up, comes down, and we did our estimate based on $1,000 a pound, assuming that in 18 months from regulation that we would see that. We're anticipating that rate to come down in 18 months to $1,000 a pound, and in 3 years that will come down to where we are in $800 a pound, which has also been consistent with what we've seen in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, significantly in consistency on that. As a reflection of that, in our initial report 2 years ago, our very conservative measure was $5 a pound, and then the very aggressive at the time was $20 a pound. Again, we didn't know where the numbers were, or if that was consistent with all the other tax measures that were out there at the time. And then reflective of the rates you see here, again, the lows that we provided at the time were what we're looking at what's happening today, and that has dropped down across the state. We are working with 25 cities and counties for the June and November ballots. June's are already completed and on the books. And the November ballots were the prices that are reflective in the low rates are what we're seeing in the ballots in the initial rates going forward, almost across the state are consistency. Even those agencies that chose to do development agreements versus even tax measures, they're consistently around those same rates that we're providing you today in the report. So the impact of current and future tax rates on cultivation. One of the things that we've done in our models, which we didn't have back at that time, is looking at what the cumulative tax rate would be. Again, Prop 64 didn't pass, so we didn't have the 15% excise tax. We didn't have the cultivation tax of 9.25 on bud and 275 on the trim. Those now have gone into effect, and so that saturation is starting to take its toll. So if you look at where that would have been with the current rates that we provided back then, again, that we thought were consistent, is that's equivalency. We try to rotate it over to equivalency of what that would be today's market, and you can see where that current rate for cultivation, it would have been a 6.5%. Manufacturing are pretty consistent there, but that would get you at 32%. And in our cumulative evaluation, anything that's above 30% is really where that trigger point is for businesses to be competitive with the volume and saturation of the market. And at the same time, and more importantly, is that how they're impacted by the black market. That just means that they can be more successful because their pricing point that they can provide really doesn't disservices to the regulated industry. And then you can see if we actually map that out to where we were going, where the tax measure gives us to in 2022 when you're maxed out at full rates. You can see where the rates would end up at 11% and 10% respectively, which puts us at 40%, which is far over even at that would be not sustainable. And we've already seen rates in Washington and Colorado when they were 34 to 37%, as high as 42%. It just was very difficult for both the industry and the regulators to make it sustainable. Then what we provided you is alternatives to look at in consideration. And alternate rate A, which is what we're putting on most ballot measures in today's environment, is an initial rate of 4%, not to exceed 7%. So you can see as here the alternate, because you're already existing, what those equivalents would be that are very sustainable and very consistent with everyone's going to be statewide. If we reset this and look at all the agencies come January, you'll see the averages are going to be right where we're providing you statistically. And more importantly, it's consistent with that cumulative rate that we're trying to stay under 30% in today's market, or will be in the market in the current future. So the impact and the rates on the nurseries was an interesting thing because it's kind of evolved in various things. Again, another changing aspect that we had that we didn't have 2 years ago is regulations. The regulations back then had a definition of premises that was limited what can be on a premise. It limited it that people couldn't be vertically integrated or own multiple types of different businesses. They had to have separation from distribution, transportation, and other activities. And then right afterwards, in 2017, it was now allowed to be all vertically integrated. So it changed even the business model of how people were looking at this as a business. So as such, I think that's what kind of drove a little bit of the high volume of nurseries that you are receiving, because of the fact that, typically a cultivator could have mother plants and clones on a property, but if I'm taking 5,000 square feet of a 22,000 square facility at a higher rate, it makes more efficiency not only from a production standpoint, but to have a nursery to feed into the cultivation permit. And that's why I think increased the supplies and demand for nurseries in here. And the climate here is very good for nurseries, which you can see a lot of them you have here. So you make up currently 28% of the nurseries in California. And it's the highest in the counter and in the sector. And looking at that, then it's how is that a factor into the effect of the tax rates? The rate potentially can go up to $5 a square foot. Currently, it has a $2 a square foot, but we are seeing again that the rates going to be out there successfully are going to be $1 square foot to $2 a square foot for the nurseries. And right now, you dominating that market and want to sustain that is something to keep in consideration. So two of the choking points that we are seeing in the state are both testing labs and distribution. And so we're looking at places that are trying to encourage those testing labs and distribution to occur. Distribution, of course, can be vertically integrated. Testing labs, they cannot. Industry folks that are part of the production line cannot produce testing or be involved with testing labs, and therefore it's kind of one of those things that we're not seeing enough entry points for. As we discussed and looked at other analysis about, we decided to just make sure we covered everything as taxable, because we knew someday we would be back to this conversation as we had more information, is that testing labs, we are encouraging to either be a low rate or look at some of the benefits of just encouraging that. In the region, there was only one testing lab in Salinas. I know others would like to have an interest of looking at coming into the area. And so having some options for them to either reducing their rate to a low amount of 1% or even of consideration of not having a tax on it to incur to that will help the industry not only efficiency and cost, but also be able to move their product a little faster to be competitive. So the tax rates, the 5% tax rate on cannabis currently that you have on the retail side is pretty consistent of what's going to happen out there. The pain point seems to be for a retailer side is from 4 to 6%. The initial rates on other activities, though, because we just kind of bulked them all in there and not breaking them down, knowing that you would have the opportunity to do that. Again, we didn't know the vertical operations and now, and so for someone to be taxed on a product with those accumulatives, as you saw, those 30 to 40 could be a 50% if you actually did and all of that, of how do you still do that and be mindful of staying under that 30%. These rates are reflective of that, so that if you did that rate that we showed you, that accumulative tax of 30%, reflective is that if someone was vertically and you had distribution at 2%, manufacturing at 2.5%, and retailers from 4%, and still having a little bit of flexibility in there, those rates respectively at the high ends are now 3, 4, 6%, where they might have been 7 to 10% 2 years ago. And as we mentioned here, the retailer again is that one that because it's a retailer, they're competing with just the retailers within themselves versus the other activities. As we mentioned, the number of permits. We're looking at cultivations. Even though there's only 2,800 cultivation permits, we can be in the 10 to 15,000 cultivator permits. And so how do you be competitive at that is those rates are lower. Same with the manufacturers versus the retailers are more of a regional demand for your local group, and they're just competing with other retailers, and their rates are pretty consistent of where those could be. But the top end becomes very critical, and that's why we have it at 6% of that top end to keep it under that 30%. And so there are opportunities for both the manufacturing and the distribution now that people can be more vertically integrated is to look at that strategically and bring those rates down. So the last thing is, the question is, well, if I am vertically integrated, then I am paying all those taxes that we mentioned. We've had other clients that have looked at, especially when they don't have people coming in their door, and people are saying, well, because we have other touching points, how do you incentivize us to be able to be competitive, but also encourage you to come into your local agency if we have these different rates? And so one of the things to be considered in a future discussion is how do we give a discounted percentage for each category of if we use the cultivation as our base and then work off that. So you're not really modifying whatever you make the decision on the cultivation rate, but for each additional category they have on the gross receipt side of it, that you may discount that to have an accumulative tax that's a little lower but competitive but still sustainable for both the industry, but also the industry, but also keep in mind that we are trying to make sure that there's appropriate revenues for the county in order to sustain some of the goals and objectives of what they were looking at to begin with in this process. So the dual state license, again, the goal is to stay under the 30%. The state taking up a big bulk of that. Recently, in February, we were asked to come testify in front of the legislators. Fortunately, Tim Cromartie, for our team that just joined us 2 months ago, was the policy advisor for the League of Cities and worked closely with CSAC and RCRC on making and preaching that we need to bring the excise tax down, and either that the governor or legislator has the authority to do that. And as a result of that, Cooley's office, who's actually the author of AB 3157, reached out to us to give us some consideration of some advice on how to approach scenarios for that. And at the end of the day, he took our recommendation of freezing the cultivation tax and reducing the total excise tax to 11%. So we encourage you to maybe support that as that moves forward, so that the governor does not veto that. And then the last thing to touch upon is the support that Mr. Nicholas indicated. So when we looked at this 2 years ago, we did collaborate in coordination with the other, because we did the tax measures for the other agencies that moved forward in November at the time, is a consensus of being consistent and making sure that we were all at the same page of that, just reaching out and have a discussion with them to be mindful of that strategically, of how the county and the cities can collaborate and work together on evaluating it to be sustainable for the whole county and for all the local communities. So if we look at the revenue projections based where we are today, you can see the figures on here. We have actual, and this is the beauty of, we have actual numbers to kind of evaluate that of what we looked at. And if you looked at alternate rate A versus what would be, you can see obviously there's a big difference. But ironically, if you look at what the very aggressive rates were when we did our report at the time, and not knowing where we were at, is that if you back out the number of permits that were not in that assumption, it's pretty consistent with what we would have been at the avenue rates for alternate rates for B at the time. So that is the projections that you can look at what the outcome would be as a result of that. Oops. And so with that, I'd more turn it back to Nick if he wants to close with any further discussion.
No, not at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
County Council want to add anything?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, all right. All right, questions. First from Supervisor Phillips.
You mentioned some state legislation and staying some of the state legislation, is that correct?
Yes, so the state legislation right now, AB 3157, which I have in the presentation, it's in the report too, it's item 9 in the executive summary, is a bill that Assemblymember Cooley is recommending that we freeze the cultivation tax for a few years, so the growers can kind of get stabilized, but also that the tax rate burden costs, so that basically the goal that is we don't want to encourage people to stay in the black market. We're seeing consumers trying to make that decision of, okay, now that this tax came in new to them, the price has gone up, and therefore should I continue using unregulated businesses, or do I wish to work with the regulated businesses? And they're looking at the price point, and that's why the 30% cumulative tax becomes very critical.
And Mr. Chairman, on that legislation, that is coming to the Legislative Committee meeting Monday, and the staff is recommending that the committee consider a support position on that legislation.
Okay. And I was provided something with the CPA, California Cannabis, that talks about individual cities' tax rate on cultivation, and they look, at least a number of those cities are consistent with what we're doing now. What comparisons did you use for your, I mean, you're not comparing us to open grows in Humboldt County or anything.
No, actually, in the CPA report, and I know which one it is because I know the author of that, you got to remember, those are November of 2016 measures. And even then, you're seeing those doing the same thing as having discussion. Berkeley, who had a 10% tax, is bringing it down to 5%. Oakland's bringing it down to 5%. Cities in Southern California are bringing it down. And then all those that came in the June ballot, like out the city of LA is at 2%, and the cities that are, again, there's 25 cities and counties that are going to be this June and November ballots, are bringing those rates or recommending those rates based on what we presented to you today.
Okay. What percentage of the production do you think it's occurring here and in the regional area is attributed to the black market, would you say?
Well, that we don't know because we're still in a transitional stage. Based on what staff thought was going to be here and the number of permits of roughly 150 and the fact that you've got 104, 106 cultivators and 46, that's pretty good as far as consistency. But I would probably have to defer that to staff that probably has a better understanding of the climate here from the land use aspect and issues from that.
Well, in terms of the illegal operations, we're aware of pretty extensive illegal operations, particularly in the south part of the county, other portions of the county. We've had discussions about enforcement operations, and the intent is that we will be doing enforcement. A warning letter was sent out to landowners, and we don't have a number really. I know in District 3 there's a kind of an informal count, and it's a significant number of illegal operations in the south part of the county.
Supervisor Phillips, if I may, one unique thing that's occurring right now as well as part of the black market is that up to January 1st, the black market or gray market was permitted to work with non-regulated businesses or retailers. So now that we're moving, those retailers and distributors, in order to move the product to market, can't work with illegal or black market anymore. So that transformation is occurring in the next 6 months, that black market will be impacted by their ability to move it even into that gray market that they did in the past as well.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's the big concern of unfair competition with the licensed people is that we haven't been able to, for lack of resources, to do more about the black market and controlling it. And that's really an unfair competition for the people who are doing it the right way. Plus, you're right, we got to relook at it. When we initially, and I was part of that, we did the tax structure before the state tax structure was imposed and before the adult use was imposed. And when you look at this industry versus other ones where you're taxing all the way along, the vertical integration is a little different taxing structure than we see in almost any other commodity. Not that this isn't a different commodity, because I went through, and when you look at the fire departments and the air board and then the water issues and environmental health department, I count 13 different county agencies that are involved in integrating and trying to regulate an industry that's a little unique from any other industry that we're regulating. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one comment, since this slide happens to be up on the screen. I think the committee should be just informed that the annual revenue projections that are shown there under whatever scenario you want to look at are based on all of those operators successfully operating. And I believe this chart is actually kind of a blend of existing businesses and projected. So I just would caution you in terms of the revenue projections, those numbers may be higher than what actually comes to pass. Would be my only kind of caveat. The revenue projections.
I can add to that a little bit. For example, it shows 15 retailers. We do not currently have 15 retailers in the county. I believe we have 3. But conversely, the cultivators show 106. I believe that is a more accurate number of who's currently operating in the county. So it mixes apples and oranges a little bit.
Well, thank you, Mr. McPherson. I got some questions here. First of all, I'm glad that we're going to consider looking at AB 3157, and that's important because when a county sends a support letter, of course we send a letter letting our position be known to our local legislative team, and then in addition to that, when the committees do an analysis, we want to perhaps join the chorus of other local governments who are also saying this is the right thing to do, and that's persuasive to the legislature and to the governor and his staff that we have to make this proper adjustment at this time. The other thing you mentioned was also sending the report to other cities in Monterey County. Could you just give us like the landscape of where are other cities at? Like, for example, where's Greenfield at compared to Salinas? Have some made the adjustment already, or are others still in the same position the county is at currently?
So I think because your industry is up and running all currently, most of those Greenfield, King City, Gonzales, they're still through a CUP process. They're still building business parks, building up, and especially with the regulations changing literally at the last minute. For example, a Type 3 permit was supposed to be by premises, and strategically they were looking at multiple buildings on, a 5-acre property, and now all of a sudden they can only have one Type 3 business. So they're kind of reshifting even their design of their building facilities and how they do that. So they're not up and running and feeling the impact right now. But I think as they start exploring what's going to come out in these ballots and where everything is transforming as more and more businesses get permitted and regulated, that they're going to have this conversation. I think that's part of the recommendation is to circle back with them to find out their position and see where their consensus building will be.
I think that's a good suggestion at this time. And I wanted to follow up on what Supervisor Phillips brought up, because many members of the public don't understand how many regulations and rules and new requirements are coming online, and perhaps even new fees. What I did hear mentioned is there's some new water regulations that is posing an additional challenge and cost to some of these businesses on top of everything that we've been talking about, the state fees, the local fees. And on top of that, I think there's our local fire districts are looking to do their own fee on top of everything that you just mentioned as well. Could you just mention that and put that into context of this whole conversation?
Sure, yeah, and we've worked with the fire district because they are not a Parview. Fire inspections or fire issues are critical as far as an annual regulatory review, because as you know, you just recently had fires in the last year or so one fire can do a lot of damage, and so they know they have to do inspections on these facilities, and they're trying to determine what their fees are going to be and add that on top of that. But what you mentioned is the most critical one, because we're talking about cultivation that takes up a lot of water, gets into the groundwater, has environmental aspects, is that the industry from the cultivation side have to go through the water agencies in order to get their permits there. And so part of that is that trickling effect of a very heavily regulated industry for them, of a burden cost to them. So burden costs of regulatory permits and infrastructure costs are two critical things that when taxes come involved and you kind of do them all, and then now paying employees different, OSHA requirements and things, start eating them up, and then there's a lot of capital and costs up front without them even making a penny yet. So that's critical of them being able to be sustainable to readdress this.
Mr. Chairman, one other aspect to the water system issue, and I believe we're trying to get someone from the state to come to the next meeting of the committee on April 20th. The operators or the businesses are required to meet state drinking water standards, and that's a requirement. If Mr. Ramirez is here from Environmental Health, I believe he may be in the audience today, he could explain further about that. But that's an issue that came up in the recent past that has posed a problem for the industry, and we're trying to determine how to best facilitate a solution to that issue.
Is Environmental Health Director John Ramirez here? Maybe he'll join us in a bit.
He may not be here today,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, but we are bringing. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Mr. Encarnacion's here.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Good afternoon. Rick Encarnacion, Assistant Director, Environmental Health. Yes, there are some ideas that we're having to facilitate water systems to come into compliance. trying to mirror state regulations at the local level called point of use, point of entry. So we're trying to get that through, maybe get somebody from the state to discuss with that.
So we'll get more at our next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned other states. Where are those states at, like Washington, Oregon, Colorado? Are there numbers similar to what the numbers that we're moving to, as you pointed out in your report?
Actually, I just flew in from last night from Seattle. I was in Washington meeting with the city of Seattle, and they have that problem. So what they've done a couple of things. One is obviously the rec versus the adult use versus the medicinal. Medicinal is kind of transitioning it away as an activity, but their rates were higher, and they saw that compression where, as the market, the analysis we provided you, whereas the price per pound comes down, the purchase per pound comes down, the competitive about that, and the black market still trying to do that, is that they are trying to bring those rates down from a total of cumulative tax as that pain point, which we shared with you, of the 30%. And so that they're doing that. Colorado already did that. Colorado started high and recognized that, and actually they were at 10-11%. They brought it down to 3.9%. They weren't as high as our 15% excise tax, but they were, 11 to 12% was pretty much there. When they brought it down to 3.9, they saw a little bit of a stabilization and less issues from a black market and addressing people trying to cut corners in order to survive.
And I think that's important to let the public know, and our local press as well, because we're not just doing something because, just in response to recent changes in your report, but nonetheless, this is what we've seen happen in other states as well, and they've made similar adjustments to remain competitive in their respective states. You mentioned that there was 2 million square feet. Is that cultivation?
Yeah, that was based on, I think, the amount of, permitted space that was provided to us in the analysis that would be available. I'm not sure. I think Wendy mentioned it may not be all, it may be in the queue for total permits, not necessarily up and running and operational, then maybe she can provide that, or staff could.
Perhaps RMA could clarify that a little bit further.
The reason I think that's important is I want to kind of understand, where does Monterey County stand with other counties, right? In terms of, because as we're looking at competitors, right, and other counties perhaps making more square footage available, I just want to kind of know where are we in terms of that available space for our industry within our own county.
Yeah, I think perhaps either Mr. Holm or Mr. Swanson could clarify that.
I'm looking at them, hoping they decide to pick up to the microphone.
Hello there. Brandon Swanson with RMA. If I could just get a little clarification on the question. We're looking to see how much more space could be available to expand.
No, I'm saying how many square footage are being utilized today, and how many do we project to be available? Like, this number, I think, is what we expect. When it's at maximum, it would be 2 million square feet. Where does that stand in terms of available square footage compared to Mendocino, Humboldt, Santa Barbara County?
Comparative to other jurisdictions, I'm not entirely sure. I do know that Monterey County, when we were doing this early on, is unique in that we have so much square footage available. I did see the 2 million square foot number, and I don't know where that number came from. Perhaps Mr. McPherson could speak to that. I'm not sure where the build-out number for the square footage of existing greenhouses is. But right now, currently, I believe we're, with all of the temporary permits and everything that are out there, it's around 800,000 square feet that are being used right now, give or take. But that's, people are not utilizing, for example, if you have a Type 3B license, you can grow up to 22,000 square feet. Folks are not maxing out those licenses yet, so I believe all of these greenhouses that are being used currently are underutilized. So I hope does that answer your question a little bit?
And I'll follow up
Okay.
more with you. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
think also, just having a sidebar with Mr. McPherson, I think we'd like to go back with Mr. McPherson and just kind of revisit that 2 million number,
Okay.
make sure we're clear on exactly
All
where
right.
that came from.
It's important, when you just
Sure.
Doing the comparison, because once you throw out a number, the people pick that number up and they say, hey, there's 2 million square footage available, or there could be once it ramps up fully. I just want to make sure we're accurate. But nonetheless, it also lets me know where are we at, number 3, 4, in terms of the available space that for cannabis cultivation.
And
Yeah,
I would, sorry.
go
I was just going to offer to Mr. McPherson, the RMA, certainly with all of our land use records and everything, we'd be happy to work with you to help you determine what that correct number is. And we can work with the assessor's office as well.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
I got 2 more questions. One, just going back to the testing lab, because that's been brought up as an issue. If we want to have a robust industry in a county with that much space being cultivated now and perhaps increasing in the future, with only one testing lab, as you mentioned, creates barriers. You had mentioned that I think right now it's at 5% and perhaps looking at reducing it to 1% or none. Could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's correct. So one of the one things that I think we didn't look at the time of itemizing different categories, or we're doing in current ballot measures, is that they don't have, when you look at what their revenues are and what they make, to do a test. Tests can be from $75 to a batch to as high as $400, depending on what they're doing to a batch. So if you multiply that by the number of batches they choose, they're making maybe $2 million on an average annually. And if you look at their gross receipts on it, they don't have the same margins of what their productivity as far as for revenues are. And the fact that we don't have any kind of also shows that it's not an easy entry point. These laboratory machines cost on an average of almost $700,000. And so to put 2 in there, you already have a capital of $1.4, $1.5 million, plus the level of people that have to run these machines and so forth makes it very challenging to get enough of them even to be there. So the goal would be is to try to encourage them to come into the county,
Right.
And so that they can help the industry, because otherwise they've got to have people come here or take their product farther away, which takes more time in order to get the results back.
Right. And I think that makes absolute sense. Could you just let the public know, when they're testing, what are they testing for? Pesticides, whether a product is organic, what is being tested?
Yeah, well, it's a state standard of what their low entry point. It varies, but it's basically it's a contaminated product for mold, mildew, and pesticides to a certain degree of what's allowable by the Department of Health and Safety, and it's mandated they all have to do that in order to take their product to market, and that's why we have the distribution be responsible for that component of it, for the accountability of it.
Okay. Thank you for that.
It is
Yes.
kind of unusual that testing lab would be taxed separate from the product. So that was an interesting.
And one of the reasons we thought maybe, of course, 1 to 2% there is that we had to also look at it as if you have a testing lab that is take up another retail property where maybe you may have another type of business that's providing other services or other taxes or other benefits, then they're taking away from that. Of course, it's not like we're having 100 of them in town, so it's a little uniquely different, but that's part of the consideration of even having an incidental tax, plus they do require some kind of regulatory element that causes a little more additional, burden to the county that another business would not in a regulatory environment.
Mm-hmm. Last question before we go to the public. On the 2% for distributors, is that the right number? 2%? Are some counties doing 0 versus what we currently have? Because I think when we originally set that, I think state law changed in terms of taxation for distributors. Could you just give us a little bit more information on what's been happening in terms of that particular tax for distributors?
Yeah, when we first looked at it, and again, it was just bundled, knowing that we could be able to blend it. And again, that was at the point everyone had to go to a distributor because they couldn't move their own product. And we had transportation license. That now has been consolidated into a distributor's license. We looked at it at the time where a distributor is basically going to be a stronghold, force everyone to have to go through him, so he's going to ask for whatever rate they wanted. That has changed, and where people can now be their own distributor, so they don't have that stronghold on the individual businesses anymore. Thus, that it brings down, but also there's less incentive for that. So how do we incentivize distributors? As we indicated, it's not like even the county only has 3 or 4. it's not a saturation. Therefore, the two choking points of moving product to market is the testing lab and distributor, how to incentivize them to want to come into the county. Other counties are examining the same element, but since they are vertically integrated, it has created an opportunity to them, and the rates are down in that, consistently in that range.
So currently it's at 5%, and the recommendation would be to drop that to 2.
5% is
Yeah.
for everything, none cultivation, and so that's where we think the appropriate tax would be for
Perfect.
that.
And because we are hearing those stories of distributors setting shop in other counties, in neighboring counties, rather than coming here, and that we brought that up at our last Cannabis Standing Committee. Okay, any other questions, Supervisor Phillips? Okay, we'll now, anything else from the presenters?
No.
Okay, so this is an opportunity now to open it for members of the public. I guess whoever comes first could just come to the microphone. Usually we have speaker slips, but we'll just do it informally by just, and I think we could limit comments to about 3 minutes. And you don't have to speak all 3 minutes.
Howard's going to take it.
I feel like that was directed at me.
He will utilize his time, yeah.
Thank you, Supervisor Alejo and Supervisor Phillips, for your leadership on this issue. It's not often that in government we are standing before you talking about lowering taxes, and so this is a welcome discussion. And piggybacking on our last meeting, I think this is very productive for both the industry and the regulators. I wanted to address some of the things that were said today. First of all, we support, looking at this bill that's been proposed, 3157. We hope that passes, but as we're hearing right now, there's not much support in the governor's office that may be vetoed if it were approved today. So I don't think it's prudent for us to rely on that in any way when we're talking about these numbers. That's icing on the cake if that happens, but the bottom line is we need to think locally and figure out what works for this community, and I don't want to rely on that information when we talk about our tax rates, if that's possible. When it comes to the numbers, that if you could go to the slide that has the different tax rates, the last one, yeah. So we agree with you that the numbers are probably overstated in the $15 and $7 range, because we believe that either people will stay with what they're reporting now or they will decrease at those levels. If it's $4 or lower, I believe the square footage there would at a minimum double. And so I believe that number at the bottom line on the 5.5 million is understated. I believe that we could double or even triple that number very easily, because you will see people that are operating today that are not in the permitting system that will come forward and start maintaining or applying for their legal status. We think that's a very valuable tool in the fight against the black market. And again, we in a number of meetings we've stated that one of our top goals is to remain competitive in a consistent legal market, and that's very tough to do when you have a robust black market. That would be a major way to pull those in that market into the legal and regulated one. We support no tax on testing and distribution. We also support no tax on manufacturing. At the very least, I think the 2.5% on manufacturing is a little high. If you look at those numbers, the rate per entity is about $50,000 on manufacturers, and we know that in King City there's a flat rate of $30,000. So we are, even in your conservative scenario, we're overtaxing compared to what our community is in other jurisdictions. So I'd ask that we at least lower that to 2%, and if we could get that down to 0, the product here has already been taxed, and we would certainly support that. If you look at the wine industry, we've been fighting very hard for decades to pull wineries in here rather than take our produce to Napa and bottle wine there for a value-added product. We need to provide incentives to the end, to the end product, the value-added product, because not only does that provide other tax revenue, but it also provides a lot more jobs and a lot more revenue and just economic balance in the whole system in this county. And so we support a very low tax or no tax on those 3 areas, thinking that, cultivation is really where it is. Thank you.
Just come to the mic after each speaker, after 3 minutes.
Good morning, Gavin Kogan, on behalf of Grupo Flor, Supervisor Alejo and Supervisor Phillips. I want to pull, oh, I'm just too tall, okay. It's brilliant, this ad hoc committee to respond. I look at this as a business. A business succeeds if it identifies a problem and reacts quickly, and I really applaud you for attending to this to react quickly. Both in the interim until July, but as well as July. The 2 issues that that frustrate our industry right now is the black market and high taxes. And the fact is they're interrelated. And they're interrelated in that if we have too high a taxes, then we defeat the purpose of incentivizing people to participate. All of the fees that you, Supervisor Alejo, related to, I mean, it's a cavalcade of costs that are enormous. And that leads to the next issue, and that is capital flight. If this county is going to be a leader, which it darn well should be, given its position in the state, then we need to have an attractive environment for capital investment. Not just for operators, but people who are investing in this space. We're looking at 2 million square feet. Geez, every greenhouse here is $1.5 million alone in capital costs before you even start hiring people. The last thing I'll say is that my operation that Grupo Flor is involved in at Old Stage Road, I'll tell you that if the taxes were to be reduced down to the $4 rate, which I think it should still be less, that would allow us to triple our production, and that's triple the employees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Sergio. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to express our concerns, and especially your study, I think was quite interesting. I've been in this industry, not in the cannabis, but in the greenhouse industry in this county for 35 years. And I understand how to run a greenhouse and what it takes to run a greenhouse. Either you grow cut flowers or potted plants or cannabis, cannabis. I've been involved in the cannabis industry for 1 year. So, I consider myself not an expert, but I have learned how challenging challenging it is as a crop and the opportunities that we, going forward. So I want to speak about 3 things. One, the challenges that we're facing is that, at least for us, our company has paid $1.4 million worth of taxes alone for 2017. For this coming quarter, we don't have the funds to pay up our taxes. And that's a problem that we obviously want to do what is right. We want to be in the legal market, and looks like to me we've been penalized to be in the market when people in the black market, they're literally laughing right now. They're probably saying, look, these guys over there, thank you, because if we lower the taxes, they will benefit as well. And I will tell you that in the number that you stated on that 2 million square feet of greenhouse, Salinas, Monterey County has the ability to do pretty safe 7 million square feet of cannabis if we have a favorable tax. At the current $15, none of us will survive. We have no chance. And I think you guys know that based on your study. What I like to suggest is that, one, if you look at other cities in the county, Greenfield, King City, they have literally learned from our mistakes. They basically said, so everybody who's going to those cities, they're taking advantage of the mistakes we made, taxing ourselves at $15. So we're running out of money, and they're saying, look, come over to my city, do it for 3.5% tax. And in the other hand, ourselves, to raise more capital to go forward is very challenging. So my suggestion to you, with all due respect, is that you should consider giving us a grace period of maybe $2 per square foot so we can get to retrofit our greenhouses. For example, right, so then later you want to adjust it, that would be okay, because look at it. I'm not in it to become a millionaire, which I would, but I think that what we need to realize is a couple of things. One, for every 2,000 square feet of greenhouse that we produce cannabis, we employ 1 employee in this county. So if we can get to 5 million square feet in the next 5 years, that means that we will be done, we'll be creating $135 million worth of payroll revenue alone. So what I think that we need your help. And I think that give us the break. Give us that $2 for now. And then later on, you guys will do the right thing. I'm very confident. I want to thank you for your time and the opportunity for me to speak here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning. I'm Tom Seidel. I own Seidel Electric here, and I want to bring up a couple points that haven't been discussed yet. Let's talk about the trades. These folks have spent millions of dollars in the trades right now. The infrastructure, the building of this stuff. These old greenhouses, if you drive down Potter Road or some of these other roads, you'll see they've all collapsed. Well, thanks to some of the people, most of the people in this room right here now, they've got new life. They're being rebuilt. A lot of this stuff I wired 30, 35 years ago is all being lifted up. Costs a lot of money because it's in one spot. We got to cover that spot. We got to rebuild in the same spot. It takes a lot of money to do that infrastructure. And to do it right, they got to be plans drawn. That involves the county. There's got to get permits pulled. That's more money for the county. That makes it taxable because they can see what the improvements are. It's absolutely a tremendous, tremendous thing for Monterey County to have this terrific business here. It is a fledgling business. It's just starting. It needs all the help it can get to get off the ground. And if we tax them to death, they're not going to be able to get off the ground because they all need to spend a lot of money to get these greenhouses because they're fighting mold, they're fighting mildew, they're fighting bugs, they're fighting all this stuff. They can do it and they can beat it, but they need help. And I'm looking at the guys that can help them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Other folks who want to speak? And I just want to, on the last speaker, it's a point well taken that not only we're talking about these businesses, but they contract with a lot of other local businesses to do a lot of the work, and there's a multiplier effect with that. So it's a good point for the public to hear. Yes.
Good afternoon, honorable supervisors. My name is Annie Michaels, and I'm with the Monterey County District Attorney's Office. And I have a question, and for purposes of my question, I'm wondering if I could ask for the PowerPoint slide to be called up where, if I recall it correctly, 30% black market was referenced.
Right there?
Yes, okay. So in furtherance of Supervisor Phillips' comment that the biggest concern is the unfair competition presented by the black market, I am wondering, please, if you could explain what is meant by the statement 30% to remain in the black market, and where did you get that figure?
So if I may, the CDFA did a report, and it was a report that's actually documented on their website, reflecting that when they did their big CEQA analysis or cost.
For the public, that's California Department of Food and
California Department, Food and Ag. So who oversees the cultivation element of this, is in their report, and it's been consistently. Also, we are seeing that, for example, in the triangle, which is referred to as Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity, they estimated there were 15,000 growers there that traditionally has been a native of theirs, and to date, less than 2,500 of them out of the 2,800 are even in the queue at the local level of getting a permit. So the volume is still there, even though some will go away because they can't do business with the current regulated market anymore. That element is continuing to move product out of state, and Flourish is still providing it on the underground.
Any further questions from the District Attorney's Office? Any follow-up to that?
No, nothing.
Okay. Any other speakers? Yes, sir.
Thank you guys for allowing me to speak today. My name is Daniel Balma. I'm co-owner of 4 local businesses that are directly affected by the success or failure of our cannabis cultivators. Central Coast Garden Products, we manufacture minimum risk, non-toxic pest and disease control products here in Salinas. Central Coast Garden Farm Supply, we supply equipment, soils, fertilizers, everything that these cultivators need to run their operations. Griffin Holistics, we're a license holder in the city for manufacturing and dispensary. And High Country Genetics. We breed genetics that our local cultivators will produce, and then we take back from them, brand, and sell into the California market. I wanted to present some tangible evidence of what the local cultivation scene has done for one of my businesses. So I ran a report for Central Coast Garden and Farm Supply from 2014 to our current stage. In 2014, Central Coast Garden and Farm Supply had gross receipts of $380,000. 2015, $350,000. 2016, $1.5 million. 2017, $2.2 million. Currently, for our first quarter of 2018, we've done $520,000. Ultimately, if our local cultivators continue to be handcuffed by taxes that are unreasonable, I don't foresee my business to be able to sustain these numbers because they won't be purchasing products from me because they'll be downsizing. Why do we want to see a failure rate that we will probably see if taxes are continued to be left at this level? There are many other counties and cities in this state that would love nothing more than to see Monterey County fail. We've come in strong, but if we continue at this rate, we won't sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Other speakers?
Chairman, Mr. Supervisor, good to see you. Oliver Bates, Big Sur Farmers Association. Just wanted to bring up a couple points from a gray market side that we feel that some of these numbers are even high that they're projecting as far as a rate per pound. We know in Colorado and Oregon, Washington, places like that are already dipping down into the $150 to $350 a pound mark. And you know, much of that is, you know, also it's going to be seen here, we believe, especially if it does head federal. It might go international. All of a sudden, we're competing with Canada and we're competing with Mexico. And they will be coming in with the investment to build out what they need to and produce for a penny a gram is their going rate. So I know in our area, most of the industry is trying to get our commercial cultivators down to $150 a pound production rate. And that seems like that's going to be a killer day one. So we're just throwing it out there that we think these price projections are too high. The size of grows, 2 million square feet. I'm consulting with a group that wants to purchase a 850,000 square foot greenhouse. I know Harborside's going to have over 600,000 square feet of canopy whenever that's permissible, or they say they're prepared for this. So those projections of size of permissible canopy also seem very, very low to what's available in the greenhouses here. And yeah, and the production cost and just thinking about if it does go national, how are we going to stay competitive once it goes internationally? Is it just over, or is it just high-grade pharmaceutical contamination-free units, that's all it survives? Or as we would we hope to open it up to a bigger market and open grow and these types of things? And then just one comment to the black market. I know that our local black market, supposedly we were told, consisted of 250 farmers in 2012. And we know that like our Farmers Association in Big Sur, the whole coast of Big Sur, does not produce what the one greenhouse of Harborside does. So once again, I think we should look at the unregulated businesses that are participating in both black and white markets out of the greenhouses in Salinas. We believe these and South County, yes, to be the big productions of black market chaos that you're looking for. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Other speakers?
Chairman. Thank you for listening to all of us today. My name is Michael Williamson. I'm with Good to Great Management. Prior to that, I was a Director of Operations for Flourish Harborside here in town for the last 2 years, from 2016 to 2018. And prior to that, I was an owner-operator out of Colorado from 2009 to 2015. So I want to share with you a couple of personal things that I've experienced in the 2 years here in California. First and foremost, I've never seen a price drop as aggressively as I've seen. So I know we're comparing it to Colorado and these other states. Those price drops happened over significantly longer volumes of time. So when I got to town 2016 here as an operator, greenhouse pricing, I want to say, was somewhere like $1,600 to $2,000 a pound, depending on quality and cultivar. Then the next year came, and I saw that price drop, significantly to this $600 to $1,000 range. So I call my wife and I say, honey, we're not going to be cultivating in California. And I have now I've chosen to not operate in California and to focus more in other states and other countries like Canada, Florida, some of these other opportunities, because they're a lot more advantageous for putting food on the family table. We've talked a lot about the black market as well, but we haven't quite touched base on some of the other things about the black market that are really hurting. And so, yes, the lack of regulation towards the black market and and their ability to operate seamlessly and not have any of the overhead is obviously a very profitable business. As an operator, I had the great pleasure of working with one of the most incredible workforces here in Salinas through temporary labor contractors as well as full-time people. And from time to time, we'd ebb and flow our labor, and that labor would go to a black market or gray market farm. And oftentimes they were paying more than we were at Harborside. But what was really fascinating is I always came back. And, I would hear these stories, too, about how they were treated, particularly women. And it's a big problem here in the county. And so if you allow these people to become licensed operators, or if you encourage the ability for licensed operators like Sergio and these other good people behind me, you're going to give people a safer working environment. Currently, I'm basically just helping people with compliance along the way here in the county, and a lot of them can't afford it. They want to be compliant, they can't afford it, they know it's going to add extra labor dollars, there's green waste issues, there's all the software tracking and the costs associated with that, and they want to do it, and you're hearing that they can't afford their taxes. They also can't afford to be compliant in a lot of cases. So I just encourage you to kind of take some of those thoughts into personal consideration, and I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing for the industry. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Gene Brown, GT Brown Insurance Services, Inc., and Pacific Cannabis Insurance Services. Like taxes, insurance, no business really likes it, but they're necessary evils. I know that besides the general liability that is a mandatory insurance for all these businesses, there's also workers' comp and product liability. These are, again, when you're taxed so high, how can they even consider the high price of insurance? Everyone I know who has their permits are coming to us and asking us for general liability. There's going to be surety bonds that are coming down the road that are mandatory. So please, in order for these great businesses to stay, we have to give them something they can work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Grant Palmer with Canacruz. I think the way we should be looking at taxes isn't how much is the maximum we could extract out of people without them going out of business. It's how we could welcome them into the county and how to get their businesses started so they can employ people. And then maybe at that point it's more appropriate to talk about how much you can raise their taxes. Right now we need to be competitive with the rest of California, and even if you went to $4 a square foot, I'm not sure that's going to cut it. We pass $4, somebody else will just go to $2, and then we'll be back to not profitable again. Also, the distribution, testing, and manufacturing, that's how a lot of this product in Monterey County is going to stay viable. It's going to have to be manufactured. It's going to have to be made into products. It's going to have to be taken to other counties. And reducing the tax to zero on those is critical. critical. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good afternoon, Supervisor Alejo and Phillips. I'm Norm Groot with Monterey County Farm Bureau. Several years ago, when this whole process started with the county developing their ordinances, we developed a policy that basically said cannabis should be treated just like any other agricultural crop, and that included not taxing it. Here we are in a classic situation where you have an emerging industry, and this has happened in agriculture as well as other industry sectors, where a whole bunch of people jump into it because they see the opportunity, and then the price comes down, and you have a lot of product that's available. Currently, we're at a precipice. We can either support this industry and keep it going here in Monterey County and really put us on the map by allowing this industry sector to expand and really become a foothold within our county here, excuse me. And that means that we need to be very competitive, and I mean maybe even aggressive in the way we approach this on how we tax, if we're going to do that, our cannabis producers, manufacturers, distributors, et cetera. So here you've got a whole bunch of people who've come before you today saying basically, we're not going to make it. Even if you wait till the end of this fiscal year to make the change, we're not going to make it. So it'd be a very big shame for Monterey County to drive off this emerging sector where we really can be a leader in this area. So please, we urge you, look at the $2 number. Look and see what that can do as opportunity here to expand, because I think you'll see that that revenue number, that $5 million bottom line there, is probably actually going to be pretty low once we get a good tax rate here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. What? Anyone? Okay. I just don't want anybody leaving and regretting not saying something. Okay, we'll bring this back then for additional comments. Anything from our presenters who want to respond to anything our public has mentioned here? Because I think this was very helpful as this report comes out. Staff and our district attorney's office, experts in the industry are able to come and give feedback and raise other key points that I think also help educate the public as we're looking to make a decision in a few weeks with the full board. All these concerns and folks, this is being streamed on the internet right now. Is this televised too?
It's being streamed to the government channel, is my understanding.
Okay, so
yes.
So it'll be televised, but this is all part of a process of educating our Monterey County residents what's happening in a rapidly changing industry, and because sometimes when you talk to folks, when the press reports we're considering lowering it, there is also an obligation on our part to educate the public what's happening. That's why your report, your comments, everyone else's comments here helps us in that process of educating all our county residents why these changes are needed in order to remain, for this industry to remain viable and competitive. But I don't know if you want to respond to any of the comments that were made.
Sure, I appreciate it. I think they're gives you a consistency of the issues that we're starting to evolve, and as a lot of the speakers indicated, this is like quicksand. It keeps moving on you, and where we don't have years to figure out, it keeps it condensing from a year to months to weeks, how there's a reaction to that. This coming year is going to be very critical, as when we even 2-3 years ago, why we recommended stabilizing and not in a freeze on the tax, and now we're here talking about reduction consideration. We are also looking at the state regulations are only emergency regulations, where we thought we had them figured out. There was changes again on that. When we look at taxes in vertical integration, as some of the speakers indicated about concerns of even taxing manufacturing or distribution and other things, the recommendation we provide you for consideration on number 8, which is develop procedures to avoid double taxation of vertically integrated businesses, as maybe that's continued discussion on how do you do that where above the cultivation, what would be that acceptable range where we have indicated 4% or 2%, whatever, where someone has multiple touching points of what would be that appropriate element in there so that, one, they're still sustainable of revenues as that, you still need for services, but at the same time, where does that kind of find that balance in addressing the different touching points of the process to consideration as part of that.
I had a quick question for Mr. McPherson, actually. Is there a difference between the price per pound for flour and then the rest of the plant, contingent on whether it's used for flour or used for oil? And if so, what does that mean for Monterey County?
Yes, there is. So the price, a bud has a higher value than a trim or leaf, and so one of the speakers had indicated that in some cases they're selling it for $200 a pound, and that would be a trim or has a lower value. Trim is used that they just put it in oil. It's like a hog feed. I mean, they're literally just, they will drop the price and create it on outdoor grows. We have some agencies up in some of the more rural counties that are just selling at $200 a pound because they're not going through the trimming process and the cost of staffing and everything, and they're growing it outdoors just to put it in vape pens and other products. So that is the case. But when you're talking about a high-end quality product, it's still in that $700 to $800 range. But as it was indicated, there are people that selling it in that low range just to move it for just about anything at a low price for low-end user as high as a high-end user.
Mr. Chills?
Mr. Chairman, just a few notes that I've made about kind of the next steps I think that we might want to consider. We need to work with Mr. McPherson and RMA to validate the 2 million square foot greenhouse number. I think, as we said earlier, we'd like to see, after close of business today, meet with RMA and Treasurer Tax Collector to see where we are on the self-reporting number to try to get a little better handle on that. I think we should send the HDL report to the cities in the county, to the city managers, and let them know that we're looking at this. I think they're generally aware of it, but I think we should make sure they get the report. One thing that I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the cost to administer the program hasn't really been finally determined yet. The number has been vetted through your committee at your first meeting. We're taking a report to the Board of Supervisors on April 17th to publicly discuss the numbers that came through your committee. But there is a cost to administering the program, and depending on where the board wants to put priorities, those numbers could change. And the enforcement number may change. The public health number could change. And just one last reminder, as we said earlier, if the board ultimately decides to change the tax rate because it's a fiscal year tax, it would need to be done on a fiscal year cycle. And the committee may want to consider at some point as you move forward, if you do recommend to the board a lowering of the tax rate, that it be for a defined period of time, after which the board would revisit that number once things in the industry settle out a little bit more. As we all know, this is a very rapidly evolving industry, and we'd want to have some type of a trigger on revisiting the tax at some future date.
Yeah, so if the recommendation to lower the tax, which will eventually come to the full board, you're basically saying condition it that this is all going to be revisited a year, the next fiscal year, right? And I think it's appropriate for the public to hear. It's like we're not just lowering it, but we're lowering it, but said a year we're going to see how it's working and whether it should remain or be adjusted lower or higher at that point.
Correct, sir. Yes,
and I think that's a fair approach to take. So the next two meetings, April 17th, you're going to bring the full board of supervisors. At the Tuesday meeting, we'll be discussing, looking at what out of the taxes that have been collected so far, how much is going to be needed to properly staff the cannabis industry for this next fiscal year.
That's right.
And then the 20th, we're going to bring, as you just mentioned, we have some more homework to do. It's going to come back to this cannabis committee.
Yes.
And so that's going to be another opportunity to come back and weigh in. And after the 20th, then shortly thereafter, the goal would be to bring it to the full board to actually take action on lowering it, with the caveat that it has to happen at the beginning of the next fiscal year.
That's correct.
Per the ordinance.
Right. Correct.
Yes, Supervisor Phillips.
I think it's important. Well, obviously it has to be at the start of the fiscal year, and I think it's important that whatever we do, and I think at least both of us feel that we need to relook at the taxing immediately. But whatever we do, we look at it in a year from there, because that has a big impact if they get established and we make an impact on the black market. That obviously has a big impact on all of it. But I do feel that the vertical integration changes things some, and at least I feel that we probably should look at the testing and distribution aspect of on the testing. On the cultivation, I think it's pretty clear that we probably need a tax reduction on the cultivation. Because when we set the tax up, we didn't have the state involvement, and the black market to me is a big key. I mean, the amount of investment that people have made in capital, I mean, that's part of a business plan when you decide to get into business. But I got to say that and you looked at those old, and I went and looked at them, a lot of those old greenhouses, you knew you had to put a lot of money into it. But with the water and the electric, and now PG&E, we're moving so fast, PG&E's having a tough time catching up and things to service them. I think that is a factor in encouraging viable businesses into the county. So, but I would hope that staff would come back and have a recommendation for us next meeting.
Yeah, no, I think with some of the comments and feedback, I think on these key points, we could look at making some adjustments in those key areas before we take it to the full board. The last thing I wanted to mention is that even though we're talking about, because of not only fiscal and tax collection reasons and the ordinance that requires the change happen at the next fiscal year, the fact that we're giving a timeline here, April 20th, and then shortly after, bring it to the full board to look to make the adjustment that will start July 1st. Nonetheless, just taking action by the board, I think, addresses some of the concerns that were mentioned here today, because it does send the message out to investors, capital investors, and then those already invested here saying the adjustments aren't going to happen. They're just around the corner. I mean, even though we still have to, there has to be a decision and discussion by the full board, but nonetheless, it shows that the wheels are moving, and we are responding to the concerns addressed here. And I think that's a reassuring message, and it also sends a message to the black market that no, we're gonna look after our industry too, and we're gonna make sure that they remain competitive, also. And as we said, we hope that in the end, that if it is competitive, that then might perhaps provide the opportunity for those already here to even expand more square footage, because now they're able to pencil that out, and I think that could end up being a good benefit that I think the people of Monterey County would like to see as well. And as we already mentioned last meeting, at the same time, looking at perhaps at limited outdoor grows, that's going to be a point of future discussion in particular parts of the county where it makes sense. And so that's another thing that's in motion as well. As we look to lower the taxes, we might be able to offset some of that in other ways. I don't know, any other comments?
One comment, we had a meeting this past week with Mary Zeeb, and she let us know that the JPA hopes to have their database up and running by this fall. So that would really aid too, if we were to lower the rate in a year's time, the numbers from that database could be very instructive on the impact of the rate change.
Good point.
Great. And this is the JPA that was formed through the California State Association of Counties, and Monterey County was one of the early adopter members of that JPA, which the data is going to be, I think, very helpful understanding a lot of different trends happening in the industry. Anything else?
That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we will see you perhaps on April 17th at our Board of Supervisors meeting. If not, our next Cannabis Standing Committee is on April 20th. With that, we'll adjourn our meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.